Karoline Leavitt adjusted her earpiece as the countdown to the live segment began. She was no stranger to tough interviews, especially on networks where the hosts made it their mission to twist her words. But she had done her research. She knew exactly what was coming, and she was ready. The camera light flashed red. "Welcome back," the host, a well-known progressive commentator, said with a smug smile. "Tonight, we have former congressional candidate and political commentator Karoline Leavitt with us. Karoline, let's get right to it." He leaned forward. "You and others on the right have been criticizing government spending, but let's be real. Every administration spends money. Why act like this is some new scandal?" Karoline smiled. "You're absolutely right. Every administration spends money. But the problem isn't spending. It's waste." The host scoffed. "Oh, here we go. Another vague accusation with no substance." Karoline pulled out a printed report and held it up. "Actually, let's talk specifics. The latest government budget shows millions of taxpayer dollars being spent on programs that make absolutely no sense." She glanced down at the document. For example, $2.3 million was spent studying whether being hungry makes people angry. She looked up, raising an eyebrow. Spoiler alert, it does. The host shifted in his seat. "Well, scientific research is important." "Sure," Karoline cut in. "But let's keep going. How about the $1.1 million that went to training mice to binge drink alcohol, or the $3 million spent on watching lizards run on treadmills?" A few chuckles could be heard. From the production crew, the host forced a laugh. "You're cherry-picking small expenses to create outrage." Karoline leaned in. "Small expenses? These add up to millions of wasted tax dollars while everyday Americans struggle with inflation and high gas prices. Families are making tough choices at the grocery store while their government is funding drunk mice and reptile cardio." The host fumbled with his papers. "Well, what about the billions in subsidies that go to corporations and tax cuts for the rich?" Karoline didn't miss a beat. "Oh, you mean like the billions given to green energy companies that promptly go bankrupt? Or the taxpayer dollars used to build electric vehicle charging stations that don't even work? Let's not pretend waste is exclusive to one side." The host's expression hardened. "So, what's your solution? Just slash everything?" "Not at all," Karoline replied smoothly. "How about we start with accountability? Instead of sending millions to useless studies and failing programs, let's prioritize what actually helps the American people, like securing our borders, funding law enforcement, and ensuring our military has what it needs." Silence. The host opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, he forced a tight smile. "Well, that's certainly one perspective." Karoline grinned. "It's the common sense perspective." The segment wrapped, and as the show cut to commercial, Karoline saw the host let out a frustrated sigh. Later that night, the clip exploded online. Headlines read, "Karoline Leavitt exposes government waste in epic takedown." The comments were flooded with people outraged at the spending, left, right, and independent alike. Millions of views. Millions of people now paying attention. And Karoline? She was just getting started. As Karoline left the studio, her phone buzzed nonstop with notifications. The clip of her dismantling the host's weak arguments was spreading like wildfire. Social media was ablaze with reactions, memes, and debates. Some users were posting sarcastic videos of mice in tiny bars getting government-funded drunk, while others joked about lizards training for the Olympics. Her assistant called as soon as she got into the car. "Karoline, you broke the internet. Again." The segment has over 10 million views across different platforms, and it hasn't even been 24 hours. Karoline smirked. "Not bad for a night's work." "Not bad?" Her assistant laughed. "It's insane. Even mainstream outlets are picking it up. They're trying to fact-check you, but guess what? Every ridiculous example you gave is real. They're scrambling to justify it." Karoline shook her head. "They always do. The worst part? No one would even know about this if we didn't expose it. They count on Americans being too busy working and paying taxes to notice where their money actually goes." Her assistant sighed. "Speaking of exposure, some lawmakers are reacting too. A couple of representatives tweeted about it, calling for spending audits. And get this, one senator just announced he's introducing a bill to cut government waste. Karoline raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, he's suddenly outraged after years of voting for these bloated budgets? Bingo, her assistant said. But still, this is getting real attention. People are fired up. Karoline leaned back in her seat, thinking. She had expected some reaction, but this was bigger than she thought. If Congress was feeling the heat, then maybe, just maybe, there was a real opportunity here. Let's keep the pressure on, she said. Schedule me for another round of interviews, but this time, let's go beyond just calling out the waste. Let's talk about solutions. Real ones. Her assistant paused. You're thinking of making this bigger, aren't you? Karoline smiled. Why stop at exposing the problem? It's time to demand change. Let's take this fight all the way to Washington. As the city lights blurred past her window, she knew this was just the beginning. The government could waste millions trying to make drunk mice and fit lizards, but they had just made one major miscalculation. They had underestimated Karoline Leavitt. The next morning, Karoline woke up to another whirlwind of media attention. Her inbox was flooded with interview requests, support from conservative leaders, and of course angry responses from left-wing pundits trying to spin the situation. Her phone buzzed. It was her assistant again. Karoline, it's getting crazier. The White House press secretary was asked about the spending report in today's briefing. Karoline sat up. And? She dodged, of course. Said something about investments in research and how conservatives are misrepresenting the facts. But here's the kicker. When a reporter specifically asked about the drunk mice study, she laughed and said she wasn't aware of that particular program. Karoline grinned. So even they can't defend it. Exactly, her assistant said. Oh, and that senator who's now pretending to care? He just introduced a bill called the Taxpayer Accountability Act, and you're getting credit for inspiring it. Karoline rolled her eyes. Classic. But hey, if it actually leads to real spending cuts, I don't care who takes the credit. That's the thing, her assistant continued. People aren't just mad, they want action. Grassroots activists are organizing petitions. Conservative watchdog groups are digging even deeper into spending records. This has become bigger than a viral moment. It's a movement. Karoline exhaled, realizing just how much momentum this had gained. It wasn't just about exposing government waste anymore, it was about fixing it. Let's capitalize on this, she said. I want a full breakdown of every ridiculous taxpayer-funded project we can find. I'll do a video series exposing them one by one. Her assistant laughed. You're turning this into a full-on campaign? Why not? Karoline smirked. The media wants to dismiss me as a soundbite? Fine, I'll give them facts they can't ignore. That afternoon, she recorded her first deep dive video. Armed with government spending reports and a no-nonsense attitude, she broke down every absurd project in detail, naming names, citing sources, and challenging politicians to justify the waste. The video blew up instantly, millions of views, thousands of comments from furious taxpayers. Even some moderates and independents were admitting she had a point. By the end of the week, multiple lawmakers were calling for hearings on government spending. Agencies were being forced to answer uncomfortable questions, and Karoline, she wasn't done yet. Because if Washington thought they could waste millions and get away with it, they had just met their worst nightmare. Someone who wasn't afraid to call them out, expose the truth, and demand accountability. And she was just getting started. Karoline's phone was practically melting from the sheer volume of calls, texts, and notifications. Lawmakers were scrambling. Journalists were begging for interviews, and even some left-leaning outlets were reluctantly admitting that the government waste she exposed was indefensible. Her assistant called again. Karoline, this is officially huge. The House Oversight Committee just announced they're launching a formal review into wasteful government spending. They're citing your video series as one of the reasons. Karoline grinned. Well. Looks like the pressure is working. Not just that, her assistant continued. A few senators are pushing for immediate budget cuts and, get this, the agency that funded the drunk mice study, They quietly pulled the plug on it after the backlash. Karoline laughed. So they can cancel taxpayer-funded rodent happy hour, but only when they get caught? Pretty much, her assistant said. Oh, and I hope you're ready for some serious airtime. Tucker's team just called. They want you on tonight. Karoline raised an eyebrow. Primetime coverage? Perfect. Let's do it. Later that evening, she stepped into the brightly lit studio, her confidence unwavering. As soon as the segment started, the host wasted no time getting to the point. Karoline, you've single-handedly exposed millions in wasted tax dollars, embarrassed politicians, and forced Washington to take action, he said. Did you expect this to blow up the way it has? Karoline smirked. Honestly, no. I thought people would be outraged, but I didn't expect Congress to be scrambling this fast. Turns out when you shine a light on their wasteful spending, they panic. The host chuckled. That they do. But here's what I don't get. How is it that the people who claim to be for the middle class have no problem wasting taxpayer dollars on things like lizard treadmills? Karoline nodded. That's the hypocrisy of it. They tell struggling Americans to tighten their belts while they funnel millions into nonsense. If they had to spend their own money this way, they'd never allow it. The host leaned in. So what's next? You've already forced a national conversation. What's your next move? Karoline smiled, her eyes gleaming with determination. We keep the pressure on. This isn't just about one viral moment. This is about accountability. I want every American to know exactly where their tax dollars are going. And I'm not stopping until real change happens. By the next morning, the interview had gone viral. Defund the waste was trending. Citizens were calling their representatives, demanding answers. Washington had finally been put on notice. And Karoline Leavitt? She wasn't just winning the debate, she was leading the movement. The morning after her explosive interview, Karoline woke up to something she never expected, an email from a senior White House advisor. The subject line read, "Request for discussion." She smirked. Now they want to talk. Her assistant, already on the phone, was equally stunned. Karoline, this is wild. The administration is trying to control the damage. They're offering to meet off the record to discuss concerns about government spending narratives. Karoline scoffed. Translation: they're panicking and want me to stop talking about it. Exactly, her assistant said. And get this. More whistleblowers are coming forward. A government worker just leaked a new report showing even more insane waste. Karoline sat up. How bad? Bad, her assistant said. Try $50 million on diversity training for the Department of Agriculture, including a program that teaches farmers about white privilege. Karoline nearly dropped her coffee. You're kidding. Nope. And there's more. $1 billion in taxpayer money allocated for climate initiatives was spent on luxury electric vehicles for federal employees, many of which sit unused because there aren't enough charging stations. Karoline shook her head in disbelief. Unreal. And they wonder why Americans don't trust them. So, her assistant asked, are we taking the White House meeting? Karoline thought for a moment. Oh, we're taking it, but not to cut a deal. I want to hear them squirm, and I want them to know I'm not backing down. Her assistant laughed. That's the Karoline I know. Also, just a heads up. Another senator just called for a full-scale audit of government spending, citing your work. Karoline grinned. Good, let's keep the pressure on. Later that week, she walked into a sleek D.C. office where 2 White House aides were waiting. Their smiles were polite, but their eyes were wary. Karoline, we appreciate you coming in, one of them started. We believe there's some misrepresentation happening around these spending reports. Karoline folded her arms. Oh? So, are you saying the documents I've been citing are fake? The aides exchanged nervous glances. Not fake, but context matters. Some of these programs serve long-term research goals. Karoline leaned forward. Please tell me the long-term goal of getting mice drunk on taxpayer dollars. Silence. She smirked. Look, I know why I'm here. You want me to tone it down. That's not happening. The American people deserve transparency, and I'm going to make sure they get it. The aides sighed, realizing the meeting was a lost cause. We just hope you'll consider how this rhetoric affects public trust. Karoline stood up. Public trust? That's exactly what I'm trying to restore. You all broke it. With that, she walked out, knowing one thing for sure. Washington wasn't going to change on its own. But now, the people were watching, and she wasn't going anywhere. As Karoline walked out of the meeting, her phone buzzed with a new notification. She glanced down. Her latest video, exposing even more government waste, had just crossed 20 million views in less than 24 hours. The public wasn't just watching. They were outraged. Her assistant called before she even made it to the car. Okay, first off, that was legendary. Second, you won't believe what's happening now. Karoline smirked. Try me. The House Oversight Committee just announced an emergency hearing on government waste. They want you to testify. Karoline raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, the same politicians who ignored this for years are now pretending they care? Pretty much. But this is real. The media's all over it. Even some Democrats are feeling the pressure and calling for better spending transparency. Karoline laughed. Oh, so now they care? Amazing what public humiliation can do. Her assistant chuckled. Oh, and one more thing. You're trending worldwide. Again. Karoline opened Twitter. Sure enough, Dollars to Fund the Waste and Karoline Leavitt Expose Them were the top trends. People were flooding the replies with memes, receipts, and even more examples of ridiculous government spending. But then, a new headline caught her attention. Breaking. Whistleblower reveals secret government slush fund, billions in untracked taxpayer money. Discovered. Karoline's eyes widened. Are you seeing this? Her assistant was already reading the report. Yep, this is huge. A former Treasury Department official just came forward, claiming there's a hidden pool of money used for pet projects that never get disclosed in public budgets. Karoline exhaled. So not only are they wasting money, but they're hiding even more from us? Looks like it. Karoline's mind raced. The hearing, the viral movement, the White House scrambling. This wasn't just about wasteful spending anymore. This was corruption. And now, she had a new mission. Tell the Oversight Committee I'll testify, she said, stepping into her car. And get me every detail on that slush fund. If they thought I was a problem before. She glanced back at the White House in the distance, a determined fire in her eyes. They have no idea what's coming. The next few days were a whirlwind. Karoline's testimony before Congress was set, and the media frenzy only intensified. Every major network, from conservative outlets to mainstream liberal stations, was covering the story. Even the ones who previously dismissed her were now forced to acknowledge that something big was happening. The night before the hearing, Karoline sat in her home office, poring over reports and whistleblower documents. The more she read, the angrier she got. This wasn't just reckless spending, it was deliberate deception. Her assistant called, voice buzzing with excitement. Karoline, we just got another leak. Karoline rubbed her temples. More lizard treadmills? No, worse. A classified report shows that over $200 million was funneled to community outreach programs that don't actually exist. Karoline sat up. Wait. You're saying the government created fake programs just to move money around? Yep, and here's the kicker. Some of that money was redirected into campaign funds for certain politicians. It's straight up fraud. Karoline exhaled. Send me everything. This just became more than a spending scandal. The next morning, as she walked into the Capitol, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and social media exploded. Inside, the hearing room was packed. Members of Congress sat at the long table, some looking eager, others visibly nervous. They knew what was coming. When it was her turn to speak, Karoline didn't hold back. The American people deserve to know the truth, she began, locking eyes with the committee members. This isn't just about waste. It's about corruption, at the highest levels of government. She laid out the facts. Millions wasted on useless research, slush funds hidden in secret budgets, tax dollars funneled into political campaigns. Every revelation sent murmurs through the room. Some lawmakers shifted uncomfortably. Others furiously scribbled notes, then she dropped the bombshell. These aren't just bad investments or mismanaged funds. This is fraud. And I have the documents to prove it. She held up the leaked reports. The room went dead, silent. A few committee members looked at each other, realizing that this wasn't something they could just sweep under the rug. A congressman cleared his throat. Ms. Leavitt, are you saying that taxpayer money has been illegally diverted for political gain? Karoline met his gaze. That's exactly what I'm saying. Chaos erupted. Some politicians demanded an immediate investigation. Others scrambled to downplay it. News outlets ran the clip on repeat. The hashtag #Leavitt exposes corruption shot to #1 worldwide. Back at the White House, the press secretary dodged questions. Multiple lawmakers suddenly retired from politics.